have um, I have 50 handouts, and I think there's about I think that's enough for everyone, right? I'm looking. Yeah, that'd be great if you could. These are the pretty ones in binders, and then the office staff at the church ran out of binders, and Amazon was late on the delivery, so these are in manila envelopes. Well, there you have it. I got the holes punched, though, if you find something to put them in. Let me work back in here. Oh, can you? Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I can take them.
Okay. We have 4 of these sessions, and what I like to do in these sessions is to look at the major prophecies in the New Testament, minus Revelation. Minus Revelation. So I don't know if that will be of a great value to you, but again, it's something you can take home. You can say, hey, I reviewed all the major prophecies from Matthew down to, what's that last book before? Is it Jude? Yeah, Jude before Revelation. And so anyway, I'm briefed on that. And again, there's a lot of teaching on TV. There's a lot of teaching, and there's still a lot of books being published, maybe not as much as there was 10 years ago, but I want to share these things with you. And if you flip the front page over, you'll see some topics there: the tribulation, the rapture, the man of sin, and the Antichrist, and then a timeline of things to come. And I don't know if we'll get down to the end, but there's a little chapter in there on what happens when I die. Of course, I don't know for sure, but the Bible has some to say about that. And then the question of Israel there at the end. I'm going to pray, and I'll have my eyes closed for, 30, 45 seconds. If this is not what you want, that gives you a chance to escape. And no hard feelings, all right? Father, we thank you for this morning, and we thank you for the health that we had when we got up, and we so appreciate the air in our lungs and the strength in our legs. And Father, as we look at your word here just for a few minutes, we pray that you'll give illumination, and that it will be a word of exhortation and a word of encouragement for us. In the name of Christ we pray, amen. All right, I should have said, if you're going to flee, leave the book. Guys, I'm not going to read it, but everything I say will probably be in here, and that will perhaps make things a little clearer. One of the things that is often talked about in the world today is the Great Tribulation. And that term comes out of Matthew chapter 24, where in verse 21, the Bible says these words, For then there will be great tribulation, such as not been since the beginning of the world until this time, nor ever shall be. And so one of the components when you think about end of time teaching is this issue of the Great Tribulation. Now, this idea comes out of, again, Matthew chapter 24. And in this chapter, you have several things introduced that are often components of what people see as happening in the future. One is that the gospel will be preached to everyone before the end of time. That's here in Matthew chapter 24 that you'll see. And I'm probably the only guy here who read 2 biographies of Jimmy Swaggart back in the day. Strange personality that I was that bored, wanted to figure out what made the man tick. And but one of the things that he firmly believed, he wasn't joking, was that he was called of God to take the gospel to the ends of the world. And so he probably did more with the TV ministry back in his prime than anyone else. and he taught that the end of time was coming, and it would come when everybody heard the gospel, and he was called by God to usher in the end of time in that way. That passage is found in these verses that we're going to look at. A lot of people talk about the the signs of the end, the famines, the earthquakes, the natural disasters. Others talk about an antichrist figure who will stand in the rebuilt temple someday. All of that stuff is going to come out of the passages that we look at, or these passages, I should say, are foundational for those who teach those doctrines. So I want to look at these verses with you and get to what I think they're driving at. And in Matthew chapter 24, the context is that Jesus is at the temple. And in verse 1, we read, "Then Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came up to show him the buildings of the temple." Now, the temple was a great building. This is the second temple. Solomon had built the first, Zerubbabel had built the second. Antiochus Epiphanes had greatly damaged it and destroyed it about 150 to 200 years before Christ was born. But Herod the Great had came along and in a way to sort of get or help his approval rating with the Jews, he began to refurbish it, rebuilt a lot of things that Antiochus had tore down, and it was a magnificent sight. And it was a building that you thought would stand forever. Some of those stones were nearly 70 feet long. And again, when you talk about tearing down this kind of a building with the technology of that day, it seemed impossible. It seemed like that building would stand forever. But as they're showing it to him, in verse 2, Jesus says, "Do you not see these things? Surely I say to you, not one stone will be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down." Now again, some of those stones were, here in the notes, 67 feet long, 7.5 feet high, 9 feet wide. Who's going to throw these stones down? And so that creates many questions in the minds of the disciples that perhaps we can't fully grasp 2,000 years later, not being in that culture. But not only the ideal of who can throw these stones down, but the implications of these stones coming down. Because if these stones come down, it means, first of all, that God's not in the temple. He's not in the holy place. I mean, the Jews' great security was that God was in there in that holy of holy place. That was his throne room on earth. And when you go to the Old Testament and one angel can kill 165,000 people, think what God could do. And nobody's getting in that temple if God's in that temple. And so if the temple comes down, it means that God has abandoned the people. He's not in the holy place anymore. And the temple will be the last thing to come down. If the temple comes down, that's only because the entire city and the entire nation has come down. The temple is the citadel. It'll be the last thing that comes down. And then there's all kinds of implications in regards to what does that mean for the Jewish religion. Because you can't have Old Testament Judaism without that temple. I mean, Jews would say there's 613 laws. When you start reading those laws, you have to have the temple to obey so many of those commandments, because you got the priesthood and you got the sacrifices in the temple, and the religious life revolved around the temple. You can't keep all those commandments without a temple or a tabernacle. In fact, on the second page there, you'll see an extended quote by Jacob Neusner, who says that once the temple came down, Neusner's a Jewish historian, he said the Jews had to rewrite Judaism. And the people who rewrote Judaism were the Pharisees that were left. And they had to rewrite Judaism to function without a temple or the land or the city. And so Orthodox Judaism today is nothing but Pharisaism. It's the Pharisees that wrote Orthodox Judaism today. So when you see the Orthodox Jews with the hats and the curls in their hair, that's Pharisaism. Because they had to write it without the temple, which means that modern day Orthodox Judaism looks very little in many ways like Old Testament Judaism. So the implications were great. Another implication, and I don't want to dig too far on this because there's a lot of unanswered questions here, but for those who see the Jewish nation as playing the central role in future prophecy, I know this sounds like a stupid question, but they're left to grapple with what does it mean to even be a Jew. Now, there's debate about where the records were kept about genealogies of the Jews. And so you get two different viewpoints depending on who you listen to, but nobody, I guess, knows for sure. But there is a line of thought that the genealogy of the Jews was kept in the temple. The evidence that I am indeed a child of Abraham, I can trace my lineage to Abraham, was kept somewhere in Israel, and a lot of people say in the temple. Now, even among the Jews today, they know they can't trace their lineage to Abraham. Those records don't exist. I was reading an article by a rabbi recently, and the rabbi was talking. He said he was at a party. It was a Jewish gathering, and a guy came up and said that he could trace his lineage all the way to King David, and he said everybody laughed because we all know that's not possible. So, with the destruction of Israel and the destruction of the temple, the records of the genealogy are no longer with us. So when you talk about the children of Abraham and all of these promises for the children of Abraham, if that's central to your future prophecy, who are the children of Abraham? Because nobody knows. Nobody knows. I mean, there's Jewish DNA, but that is a collection of. There's been so much interracial marriage, and that's been so polluted. They say that there's really not a great difference in Jewish DNA and the Palestinian DNA that comes from that region. It's more of a regional thing. What I'm saying is when the temple goes down, we lose the record of who can actually trace their lineage to Abraham. So again, for those who talk about the promises for the Jews and would see the prophecy or see the command given to Abraham, and I think Genesis 12 about those who bless you, I'll bless. Those who curse you, I'll curse. And they say that applies to all the children of Abraham from then to the end of time. Problem is you don't know who those people are without those records that were destroyed when the temple went down. So there are all kinds of implications, and again, I don't know that we can fully grasp entirely what the disciples felt when Jesus said that, but it's on their mind, and so when they are together, in verse 3, they come to Jesus and say, tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? When will these things be? What will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? Now, just an important issue there. Your King James would say the end of the world, but it's the age. There are three Jewish words translated for world, and they have very different meanings. And so we're not talking about the end of the visible world as we know it, but we're talking about the end of an age, an end of a time frame. That's what they're asking. Now, before you go on in Matthew chapter 24, you have to ask and answer a question, and which is, are they asking one question three different ways, or are they asking three questions? They say, when will these things be? What will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? Now, you say, well, that's very simple. That sounds like three questions to me. But the complication with that is that Matthew is giving a longer rendering of a conversation that Mark and Luke record. And if you'll notice in Mark chapter 13, you have the same setup in verse 1. Then he went out of the temple. One of his disciples said to him, "Teacher, see what manner of stones and what buildings are here." And Jesus said, "Do you not see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left on another that shall not be thrown down." Now, the same conversation, got to be the same conversation. It's not likely that they would have this identical conversation twice. And then in verse 3, now as he sat on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign when they are fulfilled?" Sounds like really one question there. When is it going to be, and what will be the signs when it's about to happen? Now, in Luke chapter 21, same passage is recorded. Again, very unlikely that this is a different conversation. Verse 5, then, Luke 21:5, then as some spoke of the temple, how it was adorned with beautiful stones and donations, he said, "These things which you see, the day will come in which not one stone will be left on another that shall not be thrown down." So they ask him, saying, "Teacher, when will these things be, and what sign will there be when these things are about to take place?" Okay. So Mark and Luke, who record this conversation, say it's one question. I mean, two parts of that. You're talking about the temple being torn down, Jesus. When is this going to happen? And what will be the sign that it's about to happen? Okay. Well, that's Mark and Luke's rendering of how that conversation gets set up. So the question is then what's going on with Matthew? Is it one question or three questions? Are they asking in Matthew, when will the temple be destroyed? And then second question, when will you come back? And third question, when will the end of the world come? Because, again, Mark and Luke say it was one question, that the only question that is being answered in this passage is, when will the temple be destroyed, and what will be the signs of the end of the temple being destroyed? My belief is that what you have then in Matthew is one question with three components to it. And Matthew isn't saying something different than Luke and Mark were saying. And I use on the bottom of page 2, perhaps an illustration of being in Japan in 1945, and you're in Nagasaki, and the atomic bomb's going to be dropped, and nobody ever seen an atomic bomb. Nobody can fathom what that would mean. And so you're walking around, and they're showing you all the sights, as they were showing Jesus the temple. And you say, listen, the day's coming when everything you've shown me will be utterly eviscerated. It'll be destroyed. It'll be evaporated. It'll be gone. And, I mean, if you say that to the person who is living there, they might stutter a little bit, not understand what you say, and they might say, when is this going to happen? I mean, what? You mean the Americans are going to destroy all of this? You mean that the Japanese Empire is going to come to an end? This age of imperial rule is going to end? They're getting at the same question here, but with a little different implication. Again, however you approach Matthew 24, you've got to get it into agreement with Luke and Matthew, or Luke and Mark. Luke and Mark say it's one question. Matthew seems to imply it's three, but I think what Matthew is pointing out that all of these things go together. The end, you can't have the end without God judging us. God's going to abandon the temple. The judgment of God's coming on us. The Jewish age is about to end. All of these things are wrapped together. And so then Jesus begins to answer the question of what will be the signs that all this is going to happen. And he begins to say, well, in verse 5, one sign that the end is coming is that many will come in my name saying, I'm the Christ, and they're going to deceive a lot of different people. Question is, did that happen leading up to the end of the Jewish nation and the destruction of the temple? And the answer is yes. And I won't go through all of those passages, but even in the book of Acts, we read about a lot of people coming and claiming to be a minister of God, claiming to have deific characteristics. And Josephus will record many, many more. So many were in fact coming, claiming to be the Messiah during this time period. And then in verse 6, you'll hear of wars and rumors of wars, so that you are not troubled, for these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and there'll be famines, pestilence, earthquakes in various places. All of these are the beginning of sorrows. Now, I just want to point out, again, if you say that Matthew is answering three questions: when will the temple be destroyed? What will be the sign of the coming of Christ? And what will be the sign of the end of the age? Early on, he's still got to be talking about the temple. So to put verse 6 and say, well, the signs of the times are here, and it's famines, it's earthquakes. Even if it's three questions, you can't say he jumps to the last question first. He's still talking about the destruction of the temple. It got to be. And so you look at the history of that time and where all these things happening. Yes, there were lots of wars happening, particularly in the area of Judea in 40 and 49 and 66, and other massacres. I mean, just think about that. Look at the on page 4. Look at the death tolls. Judea is not that large of a nation, and so 10 to 20,000 killed in 49. 50,000 killed in Mesopotamia, which isn't too far away. Around Caesarea, 20,000 killed. Scythopolis, 13,000 killed. Other massacres of Jews in Alexandria, 50,000 Jews were killed. 10,000 in Damascus. Of course, what happened in Masada, which is well known. Jews attacked a Roman garrison, and 18,000 were killed. All these things are happening in the 30 years leading up to the destruction of the temple. And why was that important? I mean, we hear about wars and rumors of wars, and there's a war going on everywhere, or there's a war going on somewhere. But at that time, you had Pax Romana, which was the peace of Rome. You didn't have wars everywhere. Rome threatened everybody. And the sheer force of Rome and what Rome could do for you brought peace to the world. So you're living in the time of the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome. And yet, leading up to the destruction, there's tens of thousands of people being killed and skirmishes everywhere, particularly around the area of Judea. So yeah, are there wars? Absolutely. Are there famines, pestilence, earthquakes? Absolutely. Going on in that time. And you can look at that in page 4 and 5. The famine of, by the way, mentioned in Acts 11:18 or 11:28, prophesied by Agabus, was worldwide. That hit that hit Jerusalem so hard that there had to be food brought in from outside. That was the first time in the history of the Jews in well over 100 years that it got so bad in Judea that they had to have massive amounts of food brought in from other nations because the famine was so bad. It was 20 years before the destruction of the temple. So all of these things are happening leading up to the end of the Jewish nation, the destruction of the temple, which is the original question. Verse 9, then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and will be hated by all nations for my sake. And then many will be offended, will betray one another, and will hate you. And this persecution consists of persecution in synagogues, being thrown into prison, and brought before the rulers of the nation. Now, that's not in verse 9, I do believe. But Mark and, sorry, it's windy in here. Mark and Luke both say that the persecution happens in the synagogues and before the rulers of the people. And again, that fairly dates it to the first century. The persecution he's talking about is from the Jews in the synagogues, and it's from Roman leaders. And was that happening? Well, that's what the book of Acts is all about. Persecution in the synagogues, persecution from Roman rulers. So that's in verse 9. And you read, again, a deeper clarification when you read the parallel passages in Mark and Luke. And then verse 11, and many false prophets shall rise and deceive many, and because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. He who endures to the end shall be saved. Josephus writes, and I'll mention him maybe a little later. He was in the temple at the time, or in the city at the time, and is the foremost historical witness of what was happening. But Josephus says that it was the false prophets that brought about the destruction of the city. He said the Jewish leaders wanted to keep the people in the city to fight the Romans. And so they paid people to prophesy that God was going to save the city. And he said, so all through the city, as Rome was coming in and about to siege it, there was this massive number of false prophets proclaiming that God was going to save the people. And the intent, again, was to keep all the people in the city so that they wouldn't flee. And they thought if they kept all the people in the city, they would have a fighting chance against the Romans. And so there were significant numbers of false prophets during that time, paid by the Jewish leaders. And then in verse 14, and here's the Jimmy Swaggart passage that he held on to the very end. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached to all the world for a witness unto the nations, and then the end will come. Now, when you talk about the world there, it seems almost certain that he's talking about the Roman Empire, not the entire world, because that is the primary way that it gets referenced in the New Testament. Luke 2:1, it came to pass in those days that a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. He ain't talking about the Chinese or the Indians. He's talking about the Romans. Caesar's got no power over the world. He's got power over the Roman Empire. So when he says Caesar's going to tax all the world, he's talking about the Roman Empire there. And then Acts 2:5, and they were dwelling in Jerusalem, Jews, devout men from every nation under heaven. Again, we're talking about the Roman Empire here, the Jews that came from the empire. Acts 11:28, then one of them named Agabus stood up and showed by the Spirit that there was going to be a great famine throughout all the world, which also happened in the days of Claudius Caesar. That was primarily a famine in the Roman Empire. He's not necessarily talking about the Asians or people in Siberia or people in South America or people in North America at that time. Acts 17:6, but when they did not find them, they dragged Jason and some brethren to the rulers of the city, crying out, these who have turned the world upside down have come here. Again, this is Acts 17. They haven't gone very far. I mean, they're going throughout the Roman Empire, but they haven't gone to all 7 continents. Talk about the Roman Empire here. And that's why I think Paul, in his letters, writing in the 50s and the 60s, will use this term. And in Romans 1:8, he says, "First, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for you all, that your faith is spoken of throughout the whole world." Now again, it can't be talking about the 7 continents, about the Roman world. He says, your faith is spoken of through the entire world. Are you saying in Montana? Surely not. Romans 10:18, "But I say, have you not heard? Yes, indeed, their sound has gone out to all the earth, and their words to the ends of the world." This is the gospel being preached. But again, he's talking about the Roman Empire there, very likely. Colossians 1, "Because of the hope which is laid up for you in heaven, of which you have heard before in the word of truth of the gospel, which has come to you, as it has also in all the world." All the world. Verse 23, "If indeed you continue in the faith, grounded and steadfast, and not moved away from the hope of the gospel which you heard, which was preached to every creature under heaven, for which I, Paul, became a minister." So I think that when he says, hey, the gospel's got to get preached to all the world, I think he's likely talking about the Roman world. And the reason, particularly among the Jews, and even more than that, the Christians of the Roman world, there's a very good reason for that. They need to be told that Jesus Christ has come, that Jesus is the new temple, and that you need to come to Jesus. That God is inhabited Jesus. He's the temple. And they need to know that before the old temple is torn down, so that they are not troubled. That gospel needs to get out to the believers and the Jews, so that they know that the Messiah has come. The Jews need to receive the true temple, so then they're not so worried when the other temple is being destroyed. So once the news comes out that the temple is obsolete anyway, then the end will come. I think that's what's happening. Verse 15, "And therefore when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place," whoever reads this, let him understand. So he surfaces that very near this time, right before the destruction, you're going to see the abomination of desolation. That's a term used by Daniel 3 times. It needs a little bit of parsing. Abomination literally sometimes had a strong meaning, sometimes had a weak meaning in the Old Testament. Could mean contamination. It oftentimes meant idolatry, meant pollution, meant moral pollution in many ways. Desolation means empty. They're saying when you see the pollution or the desecration or the idolatry, that there's 2 different ways to read that. That demonstrates the empty, or demonstrates desolation, or leads to desolation. It could either be one. When you see the idolatry or the moral impurity or the pollution that demonstrates the emptiness or leads to the emptiness, could be one or the other, then know that the destruction is nigh. Know that the destruction is here. What's that talking about? Well, there's a lot of different things that could have been. By the way, Luke 21:20 substitutes that verse. When you read through there, Luke is identical to Matthew until he gets to the abomination of desolation in Luke 21:20. And he says, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by the armies, then know that the desolation is near. So he sacrifices the surrounding of the armies for abomination and then says the desolation is near. Well, a lot of things happen. When the Romans went in, they sacrificed to their foreign gods in the Holy of Holies. They put up idols in the Holy of Holies. The Edomites later went in and killed thousands of people in the temple, and the blood was even into the Holy of Holies. Now that's an abomination. That was a holy place, and the shedding of blood and the worshiping of idols in the very Holy of Holies and the holy place was at the very least moral pollution. It was something that the Jews would say is the highest level of pollution ever. They polluted the holy place. But in the pollution of the holy place, particularly the Holy of Holies, they proved that God wasn't there. They proved the holy place was desolate, that it was empty. Because there's no way they could have worshiped the idols and shed blood in the Holy of Holies if God was in there. So the abomination, the things that were happening as the Romans came in and killed people and sacrificed in the holy place proved that it was desolate or empty. And it also, secondary, said that the city would be empty because if God left, sooner or later, the city itself was going to be destroyed. It would be desolate. And that's what happened. They came in, they tore down the walls, and Jerusalem was a sheep pasture for 70 years until they began to rebuild it in 130. So the abomination could be many things because there were so many acts of pollution happening in the temple. But one thing all those pollutions were proving was that God wasn't in the temple, that it was empty, that it was desolate. And so, again, as the destruction was drawing nigh, you have the abomination. And then on page 8, the command is this, verse 16, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. I hope you see the locality here. This is hard to put at the end of time because it's talking about Judea. It's talking about being able to run from what's happening. If this is the end of time, you can't run from it. You can't run from it. Then those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down, take anything out of his house. Let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant, those who are nursing babies in those days, and pray that your flight may not be in winter or on the Sabbath. Now, as the Romans were destroying Jerusalem and really just before that marching across Judea, amazing thing happened that history records as the flight to Pella. And here are descriptions from Eusebius and Epiphanius, which are 4th century leaders and historians. And let me just read to you those 3 quotes at the bottom of page 8. He said, the whole body, however, of the church of Jerusalem, having been commanded by divine revelation given to men of approved piety, though before the war removed from the city and dwelt in a certain town beyond Jordan called Pella. Here are those who believed in Christ, having removed from Jerusalem as if holy men had entirely abandoned the royal city itself, the whole land of Judea. The divine justice for the crimes against Christ and his apostles finally overtook them, totally destroying the whole generation of those evildoers from the earth. For when the city was about to be captured and sacked by the Romans, all the disciples were warned beforehand by an angel to remove from the city, doomed as it was to utter destruction. On migrating from it, they settled in Pella, and the town already indicated across the Jordan is said to belong to the Decapolis. And then a final quote. Now this sect of Nazarenes exists in Berea in Colsyria, and in the Decapolis, in the district of Pella, and in the Cobaba, something another. I'm publicly educated, and so something there in Hebrew. For thence it was originated after the migration from Jerusalem of all the disciples who resided in Pella, Christ having instructed them to leave Jerusalem and retire from it on account of the impending siege. It was owing to this counsel that they went away, as I have said, to reside for a while in Pella. So, the Christians obeyed these verses. And many of them, as you know, there was a vibrant church in Jerusalem. It was the center of Christian life before sort of Antioch became the center of Christian life. But they heeded the word of Christ that was told to them again by the disciples. And as they saw the signs, they fled to a town called Pella. And the Jewish Christians were preserved at that time. Verse 21, for then, is that bell telling me to wrap it up? Okay. Give me 5 minutes. For then there'll be great tribulation, such as has not been since the beginning of the world until this time, nor ever shall be. And unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved. For the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. The destruction was tremendous, to say the least. People questioned Josephus's death toll because it was so significant, but the death toll neared 1 million people. There was every imaginable thing happening, including the eating of children in the city, the eating of leather. It was certainly the worst thing that happened to the Jews up to that time. Now, some people say, well, surely the Holocaust was worse than that. Well, you know, when you have two great catastrophes, it's hard to know whether one was worse than the other. But I would point out that what happened in 70 AD ended the Jewish nation for 1900 years. But what happened at the Holocaust actually reignited the nation. One led to death, one led to rebirth. So again, you can debate which was worse. I would imagine if you had witnesses from both sides, they would say, no, ours was worse than yours. But I think that at least up to that time, that was by far the worst thing that ever befell the Jewish people. And it ended the nation, whereas the Holocaust sort of was the seed to reignite the nation. You could argue that one was better, one was worse. Verse 23 and 24, if anyone says to you, look, here is Christ, and there don't believe it. Again, this is what we talked about. The Jewish leaders were hiring people to prophesy the salvation of the people instead of the destruction. Verse 24, for false Christs and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I've told you beforehand. Therefore, if they say to you, look, he's in the desert, don't go out. Look, he's in a room, don't believe this. Again, these verses state the importance of not being deceived by false teachers or those claiming or prophesying events that are in contradiction to what Jesus has already spoken. All right. The point is, I believe the Great Tribulation has already happened. That passage about the tribulation was fulfilled in the end of the Jewish state and the destruction of the temple. I think that those signs of the end, the famines, the earthquakes, all those things, they may happen. They're always happening. But they were happening in a way that was very uncommon for the Jewish people leading up to the temple. I think, again, when he talks about the word going to all the world and then the end coming, it seems to me that he's talking about the Roman world, particularly to inform the Jews that the temple, which is about to be destroyed, isn't needed anyway. that the Messiah has come and God dwelt in Jesus Christ, the true temple. So anyway, I will. I'll keep going. Okay. 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 All right. Well, I'm finishing. Clint Eastwood would say that's enough about that. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Hey, God bless you for hanging in there. All right. Thank you.